I want to talk to you today about what makes a good economy. And I would say it's the lack of corruption in great part. That's what kind of tunes up and informs and kind of fuels the rest of what goes on in culture. So government corruption comes to the advantage, by the way, of a few, but at the expense of many, if not the rest of society. But today I want to show you through Ecclesiastes chapter 5, 8 to 9, just a couple little verses, that vanity and wealth, if not kept accountable, will devour one's honor and the honor of the nation in whole. So let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason for Truth. Reason for truth comes first, reasons come last. We're always in constantly learning. We stop learning, we stop teaching, or at least stop teaching well. That is true for you, by the way, as much as it is me. Today, let's jump right in here. Listen, the vanity of wealth and honor is interesting. It's an interesting subject in general. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with vanity, wealth, power. Those are great things if used rightly according to God's ways and not selfish man's ways for his own, indulging. But the vanity of wealth and honor, again, is a very interesting subject in light of wealth, corruption, and the human heart. So this subject affects many things, including what makes a good economy. Many things, but today we're just going to focus on what makes a good economy, right? A corrupt economy makes badness. A good, according to God's ways, good moral standing and, brings a good economy. In the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 8 to 9, Solomon says the following: if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. In other words, the whole coot and caboodle, if it gets corrupted, is bad. Then verse 9 goes on to say, but this is gain for the land in every way, a king committed to cultivated ways. That's, in other words, when they're not corrupted. So listen, there are two things King Solomon's saying here within the theme of vanity, of wealth and honor. Wealth and honor are two different things, by the way. And as one can have wealth with or without honor, and they can have honor with or without wealth. That being said, let's look at verse 8 and 9 independently to see what the simple message that God provides us today through Solomon. So let's break it down here. Let's start with talking about the abuse of authority and wealth. We just touched on that, brushed on that. But verse 8 says this: if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness. Let me pause there. Notice how, the way it works in cultures, those with money and power bypass the rules quite often. But they subject and extract the wealth from the less wealthy and less powerful because they are not able to defend themselves. Or, simply as well, if they're God-fearing people, they're supposed to pay the government, they do. And then what does the government do? They squander it, or powerful people do the same. So anyways, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, what does he say? Do not be amazed at the matter. In other words, it's normal. Happens. Every government's corrupt, some more than others. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. Now, if you have accountability with godly or God-principled leaders, whether they're even Christian or not, they're going to make sure they do the right thing according to God's ways. And as a result, the person below them is going to do the same, and then it kind of flows down. But when you get corruption at the very top, it's usually corrupt in many cases down forward, Now, to be honest with you, on the lower levels, we tend to see less corruption because those are people, the worker bees, people that are just servants. In other words, God's preferred. Those people, many of them tend to be very, moral and do the right thing. But still, they have to do what they're told or they get axed in their job, right? A little commentary. Verse 8 clearly illustrates that there is a corruption at every level of government. This is true, with higher level oppressors plundering and equally oppressive lower level magistrates. And this perhaps explains the state of America and the world, with blackmail running rampant in public sector unchecked. And now we're finding out that, our three-letter agencies, law enforcement agencies, is taking pictures, and whether they're true or not, or getting people, just getting all kinds of dirt on them so they can blackmail them to make governmental decisions. That's corruption at pretty much at its highest level outside of putting you to death. But they've been robbing everyday citizens of their hard-earned money, depreciating the value of the currency. As a result, the system became insulated, and division between the haves and have-nots become even more, defined. So when the high-level government officials rob and abuse those below them, someone above that person robs and abuses the higher person. Sadly, in today's world. Now, when you have a good leader, that hopefully is going to be mitigated. You're going to have justice. We're starting to see that now here and even in other countries. Just watched a video of one of the parliament members in Poland, and he took the flag, I could not believe it, off the United Nations, folded it nicely in front of all the cameras, took it out, stomped on it, and then lit it up on fire because he says, listen, if you ask the average European citizen, they'll see that the EU does nothing for them as a body. It's really a corrupt body of governmental authority that are not elected, by the way. Most people don't know that. And I'm not here to criticize EU or Europe. I mean, my dad's from Italy, and so anyways, that's a whole other thing, because I think Europe's a great place and great people live there. But you could see the EU body has been, I think, corrupted in many ways. Anyways, I'll let you go out and look for that on your own. But that's playing right in today's scripture. In America, going back to here, where we print money out of thin air. Oh, really? We're a lot better than Europe, right? Yeah, we just print money out of thin air so that we can spend it on frivolous things, as we've seen in the news. In a short period of history, we doubled our debt just in a couple decades. So they don't plunder us more. Why? Because they just keep printing the money up. But either way, they're plundering us, because it's whether we get plundered now or get plundered tomorrow through inflation and through debt of our children and our grandchildren. In other words, stealing, according to their authority. Can simply pay them off the blackmail. We talked all about that, which is the most convenient thing to do. It's easier just to print money than have to live within your budget. We all have to live within our budget. So why should the federal government get to print money up, right? Is that ethical? No, that's suppression. Exactly what Solomon's talking about. Either way, and economic suppression, right? Because then small businesses are having a hard time. Restaurants are going out of business like crazy. Who's it just closed? Subway just closed 600 and something stores. They're leaving big cities because, drugstores, because they could say you could steal up to $950 worth of anything you find in store without being prosecuted, right? So what happens? They just leave. Why would you? You're not there to give things away. It's a business. It's there to make a profit. Certainly not lose money. Either way, Solomon makes abundantly clear that there is nobody minding the ship. Evil perpetuates itself as a result of that, to the point that overtaking the government in whole. My father worked for the federal government, Department of the Navy. They weren't perfect, but they were very moral people, did the right thing for the most part. And I miss that world. As a result, we end up here in 2024 with things getting progressively more evil and sinful. And we end up here now, 2025, but through last year, riddled with corruption, immorality, blackmail, lawlessness, and other things due to the lack of godness, which equates to goodness. So that's my point, here is that now we're starting to get back to God. If you want to hear the government, they talk about Christian values and getting back to being a religious country. Well, that's essential, because without that, then every person's a religion unto themselves, and that what they see fit or moral is right for them, right, not right for you. We wrote a whole book on that, Right for You, But Not for Me, A Response to Moral Relativism. If you haven't read that, you ought to go get that. It's on Amazon, or you can go to equippedacademy.com. Either way, if you're within the United States, economically speaking, when this happens to a country, its own economy begins to decline. That's what we're talking about today, into debt due to their insatiable desire, their emotional need for power, for money, resources, wealth. These resources begin to be stripped out from the everyday person and squandered. Really, it ends up in the hands of the wealthy, and the elite few are smart enough to collect those resources while everyone has to pay them out in one form or the other, whether it's in health care that you get nothing for and you pay more than your mortgage. I mean, whoever think you'd have to say such a thing, or that you would be able to say such a thing. But we end up with the U.S. stock market where, I think it's 1% of the population of the United States controls like 80% of the stock market. Pretty big. I've heard 1%, 5%. Either way, that's a small percentage of society that controls that much wealth. So, and that's never happened in the history of this country. I don't think the world. So what's the answer? Well, I guess it did happen in the world, because it happened back when you have monarchies or you have dictatorships or communism. So what's the answer, Steve? Well, the answer is found here. Solomon gives it to us here in the Bible, in the sense that the solution is to keep return to the system we created in the first place in the United States. Free market capitalism, driven by Judeo-Christian values. People say, "Well, I'm not Christian. I'm Indian." Well, listen, we're glad you're here, but you know what? We're not going to follow Hindu, ethics and morality here. Not that they're bad, but it's not the same. No religion has the same conviction as Christianity does, and that's what made America. You want to know what made America great? It's that God and His ways. Period. And you won't believe me? Watch how things unfold one direction or the other, and that's what's going to happen. But at the end of the day, to have a fair chance of success, making money and turning a fair profit, this is called honor for everybody, right? Verse 9 speaks to honor for everyone. It says this, "But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields." In other words, he doesn't steal from the people. He says, listen, pay your taxes, a fair tax, but go ahead and make money as you will, which does not include government subsidies, by the way, which incentivizes farmers not to do things. Another story, different podcasts. But in conclusion, government corruption comes at the advantage of a few, but at the expense of many, if not all, the rest of society. It's vanity and wealth, if not kept accountable, folks, devours one's honor, their ethics, their morality, and even the honor of the entire nation as a whole. So as Solomon, the Qualet, considered government to be frustrating because it was a necessary evil. We have to have government. But something deeply flawed and indispensable is the fact that government's run by sinful human beings that, if not kept in check by the Lord and His Word, eventually will go bad, as it has. So on one hand, people should not be shocked when they see oppression and injustice in a government province, verse 8. After all, bloated government bureaucracy tends to frustrate justice, verse 8b, second part of that. On the other hand, government has its advantages. Many hold to the belief that this verse continues the negative assessment of government. Others see this passage better understood be positively, since it's with Qualet's, with Solomon's normal pattern of if on one hand, then on the other, right? It's his way of teaching. Listen, even a corrupt government is better than anarchy, which devastates a country. Its culture in its Solomon's time, it was an agrarian economy, so it would lead to starvation much more easily than it would now with imports and export ability. So keeping to God's ways is the only solution to man's sinful nature, especially in government rule. And in the end, the king who devotes himself to developing the resources of the land ushers in a system that brings the opportunity for profit to all, not just the corrupt few. Now, if you are listening to this and you're not a Christian, I'm so glad you're here. Listen, we appreciate you being here. Take this to heart. If you are a believer of Jesus Christ, you're a Christian, a true Christian, share this with your friends, even of different religions and different cultures. It's not intolerant. It's just the way we see things. It's our belief. And bottom line is, it's the truth. So they don't have to accept it as truth. That's free on every one of us and one of them, and all of us as to one human race seeking God's truth. So anyways, that being said, hey, listen, I appreciate you tuning in. There's a lot of other ways to get equipped. You can do that at Equipped Academy. That's our online training center. You can check that out, equippedacademy.com. And I appreciate, please subscribe to this podcast. We really appreciate that. If you want some exclusive content and you want access to the audio version of the podcast early, you can do that by signing up at StephenGarofalo.com. It's my community, and as well, you part of that will be that there's a $5 fee for the podcast, but the rest of the content, no cost. And then we have some other exclusive videos and content that'll be going up there. Anyways, appreciate that. StephenGarofalo.com. Hopefully see you over there. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. Stay strong. This is your Reason for Truth for today.